School District Board of Directors meeting. We are going to start with a public hearing on the RU ERV replacement. Let the record show that all board members are present, with the exception of Jill Shudak. And the Council Bluffs Community School District is holding this public hearing. We will hear a presentation. Board members will ask questions, and if there's members of the public who'd like to ask questions, we'll take time for those questions as well. So I'll go ahead and open in the public meeting, and Dr. Murillo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. LaFerla. At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Wilson to the podium to introduce our guest this evening that will be presenting in the public hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. This is a public hearing on a replacement of an ERV HVAC unit at RU, and because it's over the threshold of $139,000, we are required to have a public hearing. So tonight, Shane Haas from ETI is going to describe the project and cost estimates.
Hello. So I am kind of the fill-in today, so I have enough information on the project, not quite all of it, but roughly the ERV at RU, one of the cooling units on it has two cooling units. One of them went out. It's an old R22 unit. So rather than trying to partially replace it, we're going to replace the entire unit and bring it up. It's about 20 years old, close to its useful life anyway. The estimated overall budget for the project is $212,000. And that includes a 10% contingency. The schedule of the project is kind of the important thing. We had some issues with the last at Roosevelt with some delays, so we've pushed this schedule forward a little bit. It's still a little bit tight. So what we're looking at is trying to be done with bids out November 15th, and then bids would be due December 8th. That'll allow us to have contracts December 9th, and then complete construction August 1st. Oh, there we go. So it's a tight schedule, but we moved it up from previous based on current lead times. Working with manufacturers, if everything goes according to plan, we should be able to get it done and installed by August 1st.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board?
What does the $14,000 design fee cover?
That's our design services, so
That's your fees.
creating the drawings and then the construction management throughout the project.
Any other questions? No questions from Dave? No. Thanks, Shane.
Thank you.
Okay. That concludes the presentation. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak on this? Okay. I'll go ahead and close our public hearing and open our workshop meeting of the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Kazire.
Present.
Mr. Arthur.
Here.
Ms. Myers.
Here.
Mr. Peters.
Here.
Mr. Tripp.
Here.
Mr. LaFerla.
Present. Next, please join me in a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next is approval of our agenda. Is there a motion?
I motion the agenda be approved as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
I'm assuming you're in favor, Troy?
I said aye.
Okay. Yeah, you just came in a little late. I moved on too quickly. Next is approval of our minutes from the work session and regular business meetings of September 27th, 2022. Is there a motion?
I move that the board approve the minutes from the work session and regular business meeting of September 27th, 2022 as presented.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the minutes have been approved. Next is public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board. Did any members request time this evening? Okay, thank you. Moving on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Murillo?
Thank you, Mr. LaFurla. Always exciting to share data about where our students are as we begin our new school year. And at this time, Dr. Tracy Matthews is going to join me and present on our fall NWA MAP assessment and kind of look at where our starting point might be for this upcoming school year and the work and where our students are performing at. So, Dr. Matthews, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo, and good evening, Board. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you our Fall 2022 MAP results. As a reminder, I just wanted to give some highlights of what our MAP assessment is. That is, again, measures of academic progress. It is a computer-based adaptive assessment, so it really responds to the students and where they are in terms of how they're responding to the questions as far as leveling up or down to really give us an accurate picture of where they are performing at that moment in time. So we administer the MAP 3 times per year, and that is in the areas of reading and math, and then we also administer the assessment in science in our secondary schools, so 6th through 10th grade. You will notice the change for math and reading this year. It is administered to kindergarten through 10th grade rather than kindergarten through 11th grade, and that was really a result of us coming together as a cabinet, looking at all of our on-track metrics, and also thinking about 11th grade students aren't always in a math class. Is it as meaningful? Is there as much time for teachers to respond? Or should we really be focusing our efforts on those college and career readiness plans and goals with those students? So it's really given the schools an opportunity to repurpose that time with their 11th and 12th grade students and focus those efforts on 9th and 10th grade where every student is in a math and ELA classroom so they can respond to the data, which is the intended purpose. Which leads into my next bullet. It really does provide us a roadmap to make decisions at the district level, at the school level, at the classroom level, and at the student level. So it's very important that we get those results and we're able to dig into the wonderful reports it provides so we can make those important instructional decisions. It does measure overall performance as well as growth of each individual student. So we'll get into that and how it relates to our strategic goals. As a reminder, our goal 1 is to improve academic achievement, and we do use 3 different measures from the MAP assessment to see how we're doing with that. Our first goal is that 80% of students will score in the average, or high band on the MAP math and reading assessments. There are 5 overall bands, so we're focusing on that average or higher here. We also look at the percentage of students who are meeting their individual growth targets, and we've set that goal at 60%. I've shared with you before that is a stretch goal, and WEA says 50% is what you can expect because it's based on a bell curve. So 50% of students will meet that growth target, 50% likely will not, but because of where we've been with our achievement, we want to stretch to that 60%, meeting that goal, that target, and that is set based on the student's current level of performance and is a predictor based on that from MAP. They use calculations and formulas. The final goal is 100% of students will demonstrate some growth as measured by the MAP in math and reading because we really do believe that every student can learn and grow, and so we have that goal as 100% there. So moving into our fall data, we will start by looking at our MAP math performance and looking at those students who scored average, and high in kindergarten through 10th grades. And what you will notice this year is that we increased that by 1.6% as compared to last fall. This is the highest we have been in our math performance since we've started administering the MAP in fall and any time. So we'll look at that trend line next. So we began administering the MAP assessment in spring of 2018. That's the data point all the way to the left, leading all the way to our most current data point, fall of 2022. I did drop a line here just to show that last normal testing period in winter of 2020 before our 12-week closure, just to kind of see that before pandemic, post-pandemic data and separate that visually. It's really important to notice here, we are just seeing those nice steady trend lines upward for the most part, even post-pandemic. And we know that that's the result of a lot of hard work and dedication to some math, because we had started a little bit lower there in the spring of 2018 and knew that we needed to pay some attention there. So we're very proud to see that we're on that upward trend. We are at the highest that we have ever been. I wanted to look at this in a new way. So this is a new graph that you haven't seen before when reviewing MAP data. And this pulled out from that last chart just those fall data points, but then I really wanted to separate them out by level, by elementary, middle school, high school, and then overall as a district to see how we did each fall compared to each other in those high bands, those average, high average, and average bands. And what you will really notice here is at the elementary level and at the overall level, there really is, after that first testing period, just a really nice steady trend upward. Middle school was a little more flat, and then you might notice on high school there's that one outlier that is elevated in the fall of 2020. That was when we returned from COVID. We were in hybrid. We had lower testing participation percentages there, so it's a little bit of an outlier, but otherwise relatively flat there. So just looking at really seeing those nice gains in elementary and overall, and then a little flat in the middle schools and high schools, and we'll talk about how we're addressing that with some next steps. This now breaks it down even further. So we're looking at the overall performance of students in each grade level from kindergarten, starting with kindergarten through 10th grade, and then the overall district average on the right at the end there. And this pretty much mirrors what we've seen in the past, except just slightly higher. We do typically notice that there's this drop at 2nd grade. You're probably seeing that there. We start really strong K1. I want to talk a little bit about the why behind that drop at 2nd grade. Some of you have heard before. We have a choice when we administer the 2nd grade MAP. There's a K2 assessment, and that is heavily auditorily supported. Students wear headphones. The assessment items are read to them. So even in a math assessment, that can impact their results because they're having a lot of support with that. We also can choose to administer a 2-5 assessment for 2nd grade where they don't get that auditory support, they don't wear headphones, it's independent, which makes it a little more rigorous, a little more demanding. We've opted to give that 2-5 assessment to really best prepare students because typically they're taking assessments independently. The state assessment is taken independently, other assessment situations. And we always see that recover really nicely in 3rd grade, so we feel like it's continuing to pay off. But I did just want to note that that's the reason for that. Across the board, other than that, we're seeing pretty flat and consistent data. I did want to lay on top of that how students in the same or the previous grade level performed last year. So this isn't true cohort data because we know we have mobility. We also know that we have students who are not tested this year that were last year. So we don't have a comparison for kindergarten because we don't give MAP in preschool, for example, and we can't extend beyond 10th grade. But for the most part, what this is just showing you is the distance between the purple bar and the teal line are the difference in that group of students' scores from last year to this year. And so again, we see that drop in 2nd grade, not a huge surprise. But what you'll notice is what I was referencing before. Those students who are in 3rd grade now, that purple bar is higher than that teal line. So they do make that recovery even in the fall. And you can really see that that's true in our 3rd through 5th grades. And then it's really nice to also see 8th through 10th grades that we're seeing the students coming in this fall and they're scoring higher than they did last fall at the previous grade level. So I do want to take a look at our subgroup data too. And again, this proficiency data is very similar to what we saw last year. We can see our students who are receiving English language services and IEP services are scoring lower than our total, which is the far left bar. Beyond that, we see a little bit of variance in some of our subgroups, our racial subgroups, and then our poverty subgroup comparison to the district is pretty level there. What I really wanted to point out here, and this is a really nice celebration for us, is when we look at the students' growth from fall 2021 to fall 2022, this is the percentage of students in each subgroup meeting their growth target. And that line is almost perfectly flat, which is unheard of, but exactly what we want, because it is showing that we are meeting growth targets for all students regardless of subgroup at the same rate. And that really points to equity and showing that the needs of all students, no matter what subgroup they're in, are being met at the same rate in our district. And the other big point of pride here is that same line last year was at about 42% for our all, and you can see here we're at 51% of those students meeting fall to fall growth targets. So great celebration there that not only did our performance increase, that performance in math, but also that growth target percentage really increased too. So then we will segue into our reading data. And unfortunately, I do not have the great same news to share there. I mentioned that we really had a lot of dedicated focus on mathematics in the past, and we see that there's a need to shift to reading while keeping that ball in the air for mathematics. And we really believe we have such a strong foundation in math that now we have the capacity to shift that focus to reading without letting the math drop. We did see a drop in our performance, 2.9% from last fall compared to this fall in the area of reading. Again, this is a different testing group. Another point I forgot to mention earlier is that there were some changes to NWA this year, and they did reduce the maximum number of testing items to make the test a little bit shorter and manageable for students. So we now have a maximum of 43 testing items, and that can be as much of a change as 12 testing items depending on the test. So we know that that can affect that standard error of measure, which tells us how precise the scores are. So we're still figuring out exactly how that may have affected our scores, combined with the fact that we have a new group of kindergartners who are part of this testing group. And then we dropped off 2 grade levels at the top end this year because last year's 11th graders, now 12th graders aren't in this group, but they would have been last fall. And then without testing current 11th graders, that group is also out. So a little bit of a different group, not apples to apples comparison, but still something that we know needs our attention. So again, showing that data over time, starting with the spring of 2018, going all the way through our most recent data point, fall of 2022. Again, that drop in the winter 2020 to kind of show pre and post pandemic. Dr. Vorthman had introduced this graph to you last year and pointed out, and I also want to point out that nice steady trend upward leading up to that closure where we went, we were over 63% scoring average or better, and we really maintained that coming right out of the pandemic, but we're seeing that it's becoming more and more difficult to sustain that level. And even this last year, we started in fall of 2021 and saw that gradual decline. So we're starting a little bit higher than that this fall, but we were not able to sustain that momentum that we started with last fall. So we know that that's essential that we pay attention to this. This is also a key reason why it was so important that we worked on vertical alignment last May. We knew even then that this was something that we really needed to focus on. And when we had that vertical alignment PD in May, we really worked with coaches, teachers, principals, everybody was involved in understanding what is the essential learning for this grade level or this course that I'm teaching, and understanding what did they have coming in that was essential, what do they need to leave me with that's essential to be successful in that next grade, that next content area, because we know we have some things to recover. Students were out of school, they were missing things. We have to pinpoint exactly what those essential learnings are, that through line to the next course or the next grade level. So again, sharing the just fall data pulled out there by level, elementary, middle school, high school, and all. We're looking at this and it's showing us that in elementary and the district overall, we were relatively flat across the board. There was only a range of about 4% difference in the data. But last year, I do want to point out, was the first full year of our Study Sync ELA curriculum implementation in our secondary schools, so in our middle schools and high schools. And we did see a slight dip in both of those, and we do know sometimes we see an implementation dip with a new resource as teachers are digging in, trying to figure out how to best use this resource to meet the needs of all learners. So that's something we're keeping an eye on, but wanted to make reference to. I also want to note the teal and the pink bars then would be the ones we're looking at. We're really re-engaging students in more of a normal school year again to try to sustain that learning in the reading area. So again, this is performance by grade level, and again, we see that drop, that steep drop in second grade. Again, very independent assessment rather than that supported auditory assessment. So this is typical of what we see in the fall. This very much mirrors, again, what we saw last fall at this same time. We do see that there is, last year we saw a wider gap in our 6th through 9th grades, so it's nice to see with that overlay, again, the distance between the blue bar and the teal line is what we're looking at here to see how students performed last year compared to this year. And it's nice to see again in those 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, we're seeing this year's students outperforming where they were last year. And then again, we saw that nice transition into 9th grade, which sometimes can be difficult to make that transition. And we're seeing our 9th graders really transitioned well into their freshman year of high school. And they're scoring better. They're starting stronger than they did last fall as 8th graders. Pretty flat across the middle. So it very much mirrors where we were last year. And then again, looking at subgroup data, this is very similar to what we have seen, pretty flat across our racial subgroups, the lower areas for students receiving our English language services and IEP services. And we know that they are getting those services because there are some gaps in learning that we're trying to help recover. But again, laying that over top of their growth, this is where we see that excitement again. Again, we're not seeing really steep valleys and really high peaks. We're seeing a relatively flat line showing that we're meeting growth targets at a pretty consistent rate regardless of subgroups. And again, we saw almost a 10% change in growth targets, percent of students meeting growth targets from 2021, 2022 compared to the year before that. So we're very excited to see that while we're making growth targets, we might just have some students who are in those lower bands and making their growth target. It wasn't quite enough to put them over that hill to increase their performance percentage, but it was helping them to close that gap because they're making steady progress. So we do know we have some work to do in the area of reading, but we believe we have the capacity to really make some lifts, and I'll talk about some next steps there too. And then our last assessment for MAP is in the area of science. Again, this is 6th through 10th grade. We did see a slight decline of 0.8% in this area. And again, we are implementing a new resource, a curricular resource in science this year in our secondary schools. So this is something I want to make sure that I'm paying close attention to and reporting on as well. And you will see that our MAP performance is very steady across our 6th through 10th grades and our district average. This is the area where we have the least amount of variance in our scores, with 10th grade being slightly lower but relatively flat. And it's also where we saw the least amount of change from fall 2021 to fall 2022. So pretty steady, pretty consistent, over 60% proficient in almost all areas. So very, very pleased to see that, and we'll want to make sure we maintain that momentum as we look at our new resource and how it's meeting the needs of students. This brings us to next steps. And so at the top, at the forefront, is always really making sure that we're tracking, monitoring, and responding to our On Track to Diploma +1 data. That is the focus that we are leading with at the district level, at the school level. The teachers are really digging in, engaging students and parents in that work too, and really thinking about those metrics. How do our MAP scores and our grades coupled together really show where students are progressing, and what needs do they have that we have to determine still to meet those on-track targets. We also know that we have to continue focusing on implementing grade level universal instruction. That has been just a resounding theme that we need to have that strong core. Every student needs access to strong universal. And so we are going to increase coaching and support in math and ELA at the secondary level. That was one of those next steps we had talked about. We really want to replicate that strong model we have in elementary at math. We were seeing those nice steps of increases there, and we want to replicate that in math at the secondary levels and then also in ELA across the board. And then continue that focus on vertical alignment. We started last May, so teachers felt confident they could hit the ground running this fall, and we need to make sure that that maintains a focus. We are also leveraging our multi-tiered systems of supports, which I presented on previously, to really make sure we're able to identify and respond when students need additional support or when they need additional extensions. Again, making sure we're meeting the needs of every student. And I know that the schools are really working through a cyclical process in their professional learning communities, and they use those 4 critical questions of a professional learning community. What do students need to learn and be able to do? How will we know when they learn it? How will we respond when they don't learn it that first time? And then what extensions will we provide for those students who are already proficient? So we're constantly monitoring that data and making adjustments to their daily instruction. And then finally, we'll utilize those MAP reports to determine areas of greatest need and align resources within schools. So looking at data, schools have that autonomy to say, okay, our 3rd graders are lower in their vocabulary usage right now. We're going to put some support in there. Really leveraging those practitioners in the buildings, those teachers, those coaches, the principals, getting everybody wrapped around the data and what they can do to respond to that, and putting the people in the places that need it the most when they need it the most. So with that, I will invite any questions you have.
Concerning our English learners, how long do our students typically take, how long does it typically take them to acquire the English language when we first receive them? So if they're a kindergarten or whether they're, I know it's going to be easier for the younger students, and it will take longer for the students that may be in middle school or high school. But typically, how long does it take for our English learners to acquire the English language?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It varies by student, by age level. About 5 years would be what is typical for needing those services to acquire language. It can be shorter or longer. It really does vary.
And then the follow-up question would be,
Yes.
then the follow-up question would be, how long does the district, how many years then does the district get additional weighting to support those students that typically take 5 years to acquire the language?
I just had a training on this. I believe it is 5 years, but it's continuous support. So it's from time of entering screening, and sometimes we have delays in when parents want services to start and those types of things too. So it's continuous support, but I believe it's 5 years.
Okay, so there's no disconnect between we're only getting funding for 3 years, but it takes 5 years for them to receive.
Not in that case.
Okay, okay.
And Dr. Murillo was pointing out, there are different tiers and different levels of weighted funding that we receive based on the tiers of services that are needed.
And we provide exit codes when students have mastered, so they move through the tiers. Dr. Matthews, when do students start taking the state assessment that are learning English?
Alba 21.
I'll tell you.
Thank you.
They get a grace period of 1 year, and then they're expected to take the state assessments as others. There is a few cues that can be done for them, but it's very, very low. And so our students are held to the same standard, and they are coded as an ELL student, but they are. And I think that adds stress, and I really think our ELL teachers, and we have increased the number of staff members in that area. And I think that we're really starting to grow a good ELL program for our district, but it still continues to be challenging for our students to get all of the services that we'd love to have for them. But the state last year, I think Mr. Wilson, was it last year, where the state added additional weighting? So we get additional dollars for our students that we did not get before last year. And so that's very, very helpful and allowed us to hire some additional teachers.
The reason for my follow-up was because at one time, we were only getting funding for 3 years. And so I'm glad to hear that they've connected the dots, that, hey, we should support students as long as it takes them to acquire the language. So I'm glad to hear that, yeah. Glad to hear that has been corrected.
Any other questions? Troy?
Yeah, so Dr. Matthews, the high school had a significant, what kind of like drop in reading. Was that something we anticipated?
It's following the trends that we have seen, and then, as I mentioned, with the new curricular resource, we know we do see implementation dips quite frequently, and then we, like I said, changed not assessing the 11th graders this year, so sometimes when we have students coming in 11th grade, those can be some of our stronger reading scores, so that could have factored into that difference a little bit too.
And Mr. Arthur, the other thing that research is showing us nationwide is that our students that were out with COVID and came back hybrid, as they continue to be moved to the next grade level, that the complexity of the text continued to increase. And that's why Dr. Matthews was talking about how do we realign our curriculum maps? How do we figure out the standards that they're missing? Because I think some of the dips have occurred because our students were out during critical years. So like our sixth graders would have been going into ninth grade before they had a real true full year. So we had a closure, and then we came back in hybrid. So then they enter high school without really having a true middle school experience. And now they're in at a different level, and we're assessing and we're seeing those dips. But I do believe with the focus that Dr. Matthews talked about, we can be very strategic around the supplemental support we need to provide for students. We were very worried about our kindergartners that came in because they really didn't get a full year, and then they're entering their second grade by the time we're in a full year. And so we're going to constantly play catch up because there is a learning gap that took place during that time. And I'm really excited that we had such a strong focus and had consultants in helping and working with our district level teams and our instructional coaches with teachers around the math curriculum. And so now we're pivoting over into the ELA because we brought in a new resource for our middle and high at the time of going through a pandemic. So we come out of that, and then we're in year 2 now?
Yes.
Year 2. And so I think all of that, if you couple that together, will tell you you're going to have an implementation dip. Plus, you have students that got behind during that closure of school and hybrid.
Thank you.
So we have a few years now of MAP data. And I know that, when you came to the district, and one of your initial assessments was, we don't really know where we're at, so it's hard to know where to go. And, MAP was part of the solution to that issue. And I know that there was, at least part of the consideration back then was adding a test. This is voluntary, we don't have to do this. Do you feel like it, after a few years now? I know the first couple of years, we were kind of like, when we received these reports, we're kind of like, well, this is just year 1, this is just year 2, and you feel like we're finally at the point where we have actionable data. I hear, we talk a lot about universal instruction. That seems to have been the focus since that very initial MAP testing. I just wonder if now the data is helping to drive where we're continuing to go with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing also, if you do a little research out there, when you see a 2.9% drop, other districts will be seeing anywhere from an 8 to a 15% drop, and you hear that in the news. So I do think the focus on universal core, which is we know all students get access to, and then out of those 4 essential questions, we begin to look at who's mastered that we can continue to enrich and push forward, and where do we need to provide that. The MAP assessment data really lays out a great roadmap for teachers. It even will group our students and help teachers figure out what students and what skills the students need to work on. And that is information teachers didn't have before. And our teachers are really good at knowing and being able to recognize, but the MAP assessment kind of validates that work for them. And so we really see the MAP assessment as a guide to instruction, not an assessment of how well a teacher did, but it really validates the work of the teacher. And it almost helps her know that she's put her finger exactly where it needs to be. And that is very helpful because there's no longer guessing and hoping you figured it out. But it's another tool for our teachers to be able to look at and dig into, and then go with their instructional coach, get in their PLCs, and really begin to see how did your students do versus mine on this standard. And then what can I learn from you, or what can I share with you? And that has been some really great work that we've seen take place. It gives them something to take to the PLCs to work through besides student work,
Right.
besides, those end-of-unit assessments.
And with those groupings, what's really great about that is it gives you, so these students scored within this RIT band. Here are the skills they're ready for, and it breaks it down by skill level. So it's not even just the standard, but within the standard, there can be multiple skills. So it's easier for teachers to identify, oh, great, this small group is ready for this next piece of learning. So it's really forward focused on that next step for their instruction, and it's very detailed.
I know we've talked about this before, but I don't remember. Are there other UEN districts that administer the MAP?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm not.
I was just curious to know if there were, and if they're sharing data, if what we're seeing is common or,
Yeah. I can tell you, I know that the MOAC.
In
schools
Iowa. Yeah.
In Nebraska, they at one time had that as their state assessment. So we were sharing back and forth, and now it's something that I think that they can do voluntarily, but they've changed their state assessment. So we were able to share data and have conversation around it. But the UENs, we have not talked about. NWA, we spend most of our time around the state assessment.
any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Matthews. And now we'll do our informational presentations. And this evening, I'd like to invite Mr. Schultz to the podium. He is going to present for us on the SAMS process. And the SAM process is something that we've been doing for many years here in Council Bluffs. And Mark is going to kind of lay out a little bit of information. I thought it would be very helpful for our new board members to learn about the SAM process. And then following that, Ms. Comine is going to join Mr. Schultz to talk about our principal development and the work that we're doing. So, Mr. Schultz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. Good evening, board. Super excited to be here tonight to talk about our SAMs and SAM process. So want to just articulate my outcome tonight is to really give you an overview of what the SAM process is. We call SAMs school administrative managers, but that's a mouthful, so we just shorten it to SAM. No one's actually named SAM. We're also going to highlight how the SAM provides support for our teachers, our students, and of course our principals as well. So what is a SAM? SAM's a person, and it's a person who meets each day with a principal and really helps the principal plan their day and their week, focused on instruction and some management, but not as much management, but more on the teaching and learning in the school. They also work as a responder to teacher needs throughout the day. They're there for students. They're also there for parents. Parents call the school, and the principal happens to be in the classroom observing instruction. They can be there to meet the need right away, so parents don't have to wait. Oftentimes, if a parent really wants to reach somebody, I need to talk to the principal right now. Well, how could I help you? And we have a script that we have some consistent things that we work with, so they can really get all the facts and the information that the parent wants, and then they can schedule some time for the principal to follow up soon to make sure that the parents' needs are met. So what is the SAM process? The process is really a professional development process to help change the focus of the principal's work from doing more school management all day to really being more instructional or an instructional leader. And you've probably heard that phrase before. And really helping to get the principal focusing on those things to improve that student achievement and student learning in the school. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on what that actually looks like shortly. So Dr. Murillo already told us this a little bit, but Sam's been in our schools for 15 years. Really hard to believe that. It started off very small, like in 4 schools, and now it's throughout the system. And each time we have a new SAM that, if a SAM leaves the school, the National SAM Innovation Project, they come to our district and they actually do the training for our SAMs. And this, they call them a SAM team, so it's a SAM and principal team, but SAMs are super important, so the SAM gets the first billing in this relationship. We believe that SAMs help us improve as a system. And so we want to provide professional learning for them, just like anybody else in our district. We are about learning as a system. And so Mrs. Comine and I, we facilitate monthly professional development sessions with our SAMs. They come up to ESC to meet with us, and we'll go over different nuances of the SAM process. One thing that they do is they have a software program called Time Tracker, and they record all the work that principals do, whether it's on management tasks or instructional tasks. They collect all that information. So we kind of talk through them on how to best do that efficiently. We also invite our executive cabinet members in to talk about some of those district priorities that we have, especially like with safety and security. We'll have Mr. Stile and Mr. Hamilton will go meet with them to talk about the different priorities as a system, because a very important thing is that in their role is to ensure that campus is safe. In addition to what Mrs. Comine does and what I do, there's an external person called a time change coach that is part of the SAM Innovation Project, which is I think it's in about 19 different states. SAM's in actually about 20 different states SAMs are in. And they observe that daily meeting, which I'll talk about shortly, and they provide feedback to the SAM and to the principal on how to be more effective in their practice. And then they help the principal and the SAM review their goal and their data from that time tracker system to help set some goals and some priorities. So 2 key things. We do internal training here, and then there's external training, and that's both happens each month. So, you might be thinking, well, what does a SAM do all day? What's a day in the life of a SAM look like? So as I mentioned, the SAM helps to create and implement that standard response protocol. That person, the SAM in each school knows that, front cover to back cover, and they can really help to implement that on site as it's necessary. It's a priority of our schools that they are secure and they are safe, and a SAM is an integral part of our system to do that. They serve as a first responder. Oftentimes when you think of first responder, you think of like a medical or something. But a SAM is a person that's, they're not tied to a classroom. If a teacher has a need, calls the office for maybe assistance with a student, the SAM is available to come help and meet that teacher's needs pretty much immediately. And also they work with students to work through maybe some difficulties that student's having. And of course they're able to meet with parents and talk with parents on the phone and other people in the community. So they're that first responder when the principal in the classroom working with teachers, the SAM is available to help support that. They'll manage non-instructional staff at the school, our paras, our custodians, and really meet their needs as well, work with some food service workers throughout the day. At elementary especially, they'll spend a lot of time in that cafeteria at lunch. And they spend a lot of time to make sure that that runs very well. They'll work on scheduling some special events, some field trips and things like that. Some of those management tasks that we want the principal not to really focus on that, but focus more on instruction. They can take that off the principal's plate. And then of course, there's this daily time that they meet with a principal to discuss what the principal's doing. So let me get a little bit more detailed about that. So each day, there's a meeting between the SAM and the principal, and we call it a daily meeting or daily SAM meeting. It's about 15 to 20 minutes, And it's pretty predictable. I've observed these meetings with just about all of our SAMs and principals in the last few years, and they always start off with a win or a celebration, really talking about what's going well in the school. You know, let's know about that. Let's talk about that. Let's celebrate our work. A principal can be lonely. You know, there's only one true principal in every school, and so it's nice to have somebody saying, "So what are you doing well? What's going well?" Helps with that principal mindset also. They'll review the work that the principal did the previous day, kind of talk about it. I noticed that you were working in several classrooms. Is there anything that you want me to do to schedule some follow-up with those teachers? They'll take care of setting up that calendar, sending those invites out, maybe any email communication that might be necessary. But they also discuss management concerns. If a principal is going to be focused on instruction, they're not throughout the school all day. They need to know what's happening in the school. And I know Dr. Murillo said to us many times, if something's happening at the school and she goes down to visit, she's not asking for the SAM, she's asking for the principal. So it's very important that the principal knows what's happening, right? And so it's like that right arm, what's going on out there. And then the next thing is they look at principal's data and they discuss some goals. And I'm going to show you that in a couple of slides, what that looks like. But they really ensure that the principal is scheduled for the very next day to meet their instructional goal. And research shows that if a principal spends at least 51% of their time, a little bit more than half, on instructionally focused activities, they can have a significant impact on teaching and learning at the school and improving student achievement. And so 51's like that marker. 50 is not enough. It's got to be at least 51. So you might be wondering, well, what are some instructional things that principals do each day and throughout the week? Well, they spend a lot of time in classrooms observing instruction. So it may be some longer times in classroom, 30 to 45 minutes, or they might just be walking through classrooms, doing those, those 2 to 3 minute just pop in just to see how things are going. Sitting down and meeting with teachers after observing instruction to provide feedback. Modeling some instruction for teachers, taking over the class, showing a few things, all instruction. When they facilitate leadership team meetings that are focused on the school improvement plan, a collaborative team like a teacher PLC, participating in that, and then maybe even working with a student support team, all things that are focused on students, that's called instruction. And then of course the work that they do in planning and facilitating professional development, because our schools have that early release on Monday, and principals and their leadership teams facilitate that learning for teachers. So I want to close with this. This is a graph from that time tracker software, and this particular graph is one of our principals in the system, and what it shows is the amount of hours they spent with each teacher in the last month. I took the names across the bottom off, so you can't see who they are. And so what a SAM might do, a SAM might ask some questions like, well, let's take a look at this graph in the last month. Who are you spending the most time with? Are you seeing some change in practice in the teachers that you're working most with? Is there anybody on this list that maybe you thought you were spending more time with and you're not? Let's take a look at the 7th grade teachers. They've got a new ELA resource. Are you spending enough time to support them in their PLC? And so that really helps that principal to reflect on what they're doing and helps them to prioritize their practice in the next week and then in the next month. And there's several other different types of graphs that are in Time Tracker, and the SAM just picks one once a week. We want them to do at least once a week. They'll pick one and then really get the principal to reflect on that. So SAMs are super important for us to meet our goals. So what questions do you have about the SAM process in Council Bluffs Schools?
Go ahead.
Based on that last slide, it sounds like coaching, the principal is an important function that the SAM engages with. I mean, how much time do the SAMs receive in learning how to help facilitate that coaching type interaction?
Yeah, great question, Dave. Well, we do that each month. when we bring them up to have that professional development, we'll role play and we'll talk about what kinds of questions they can ask based on these graphs. And that external time coach, that's all they do. They really get them into that data, and they'll ask questions. What could you ask here? What does this make you think about? And they'll write some questions out to support them too. And when we bring them all together, we don't do that every month, but we will have them work with each other and kind of share. So how's it going? And they learn from each other too. Yeah, great question.
I'm curious to know, I think of, as you were talking, I was thinking of an elementary school.
Sure.
And then you got to this side and I was thinking about a middle school or high school where there are way more teachers and fewer principals, So I'm just curious how it might be managed differently at each level.
Yeah, so what I shared tonight were like the core things that are pretty consistent across all buildings, but each principal is a little bit different. There's a little bit more nuance in how they actually use their SAM. Some SAMs might help assist with some budgeting things or just getting those budget reports printed and then in front of the principal so the principal doesn't have to spend time making those copies. Others will spend more time scheduling, making sure like at the high school that things are scheduled because there's so much more going on at a high school than in an elementary. There might be 1 or 2 activities in an elementary school per month, or high school they're almost every night. And so they
Right.
spend more time there doing that at
Okay.
high school. So really it's different and at different levels.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just on funding, initially, the district received Iowa West Foundation funding to support the whole SAM program, and that went on for roughly 5 years with a couple of years of extensions on that. So we're fully funding, the district is fully funding the SAM program at this point in time.
Yes, that's correct. We fully fund that. And that's how important we think SAMs are for our system, to get our principals really focused on the instructional work and so they can support teachers.
I just wanted to thank Iowa West Foundation because they kind of pushed us in that direction to help. They saw the need that this was an important function in the schools, and they did a wonderful job of saying, we'll fund you for a little while and then you guys can figure it out. So obviously we've figured out how to fund this very critical function that goes on in our schools.
We want to thank Dean Wilson for that.
Yeah.
I would add to that, Mr. Kozar, is a lot of states see value in this, and a lot of the states are funding this statewide.
But we're not.
No, we're not.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, that's how the model has really helped focus our principals and our administrators to, because when you may think you do a lot of great things during the day, and then when you see your time, you go, oh my gosh, I didn't spend that much time on instruction, I thought I did.
Yeah.
So it really helps you can continue to refocus and not allow management things to kind of pull you away. But I would love to see our state focus, make this a priority. But there are states that have really invested in this, so I'm really proud that we have this process in place.
It's really just another way to support teachers and
Yes.
students, and those SAMs have a difficult job, that's for sure.
We do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, last presentation for this evening. We have Ms. Colmine, who's going to join us now and begin our presentation on principal development. Ms. Colmine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Superintendent Dr. Murillo and Board. Good evening, and thank you for allowing Mr. Schultz and I the opportunity to provide you an update, and actually really more of a review of what principal development looks like in our district. Principal development is a key lever in Council Bluffs Community School District to ensure we have a high-quality principal in all of our buildings, and it's also helps us focus our work as well. Today's presentation is going to focus on the why principal development is a key lever, and then also how we go about providing that to our principals. Before I talk about the research findings on principals on achievement, I want to give a huge recognition and shout out to all of our teachers. When you take a look at the decades and decades of research from beginning of time all the way up to today's date, it consistently shows that our teachers have the number one impact on student achievement and in learning in all areas. And so that's our focus. Everything we do in our district is to keep our schools at the center of our work, and everything we do in our schools is to support our teachers, because our teachers do have that number one impact. The research also has shown from beginning of time is that principals are number two in having an impact on achievement for individual students, but also the entire school and moving it forward. And so that's why we're here today. There is a new research finding from the Wallace Foundation from 2021, and it shows that the link between leadership and learning is even stronger than what we have previously known. And that research finding specifically states that if you were to take a below average principal performing at the 25th percentile of effectiveness and move them to the 75th percentile of effectiveness, it results in months of additional learning for our students. And it specifically stated 2.9 months of additional learning in the area of math and an additional 2.7 months of learning in the area of reading. And so that creates, Mr. Schultz, our purpose. Our purpose every day, we work to ensure that we create skilled leaders who understand and display the intent and spirit of our district, and also the Iowa standards for school leaders, referred to as the ISSL standards, to ensure we meet our district strategic goals or exceed them. Let's take a look at the 10 ISSL standards. You can see them there. These are standards that our principals work on every day. These are standards that Mr. Schultz and I work and coach. We develop, provide direction to our principals in every day. And these standards and their criteria, they do represent a set of knowledge and skills that reflects the best evidence available regarding effective leadership in our schools. And so notice that I mentioned the words knowledge and skills. Mr. Schultz is going to take that knowledge and skills and share more about what those, how they transpire into the behaviors that our principals have to ensure that our principals are successful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mrs. Comine. So she shared what our purpose is. I want to share what our goal is. So as chiefs of schools, we are accountable for developing highly effective principals who lead and are skilled at these 5 key things: visionary leadership, instructional leadership, strategic decision-making, reflective practice, and then creating a positive and productive climate, or culture, excuse me. And if that happens, they'll ensure that attainment of Diploma +1 for every student. When we developed this goal this year, we wanted to align it with each of those ISSL, or Iowa Standards of School Leadership. And as you can see, all 10 are encompassed in these goals for ourselves. So when we set these goals, we based it off the Wallace work. And so I want to tell you a little bit more about that research study that they did. So they found that the most effective principals have 3 skills that transcend them. The first one is around people. They're very skilled at developing relationships, at showing how much they care, developing trust between each other at the school. They have a skill on instruction. They're good at teaching. They're able to talk with teachers about instruction and provide some feedback so teachers can even improve with their instruction. And then they have a skill around organization. They can manage that skill, and they can manage their SAM, but also like how they allocate resources at the school, not just money, but how they leverage the staff at their building. We have a lot of people that work in schools, and the most skilled principals leverage and organize them so they're all, rowing the boat in the same direction and really helping that school move forward. That's what our most skillful principals do based on the Wallace Foundation's findings. And so from those skills, then they behave certain ways, right? So I've said this a lot and I'll say it again, but they engage in instructionally focused conversations with teachers. When they're in classrooms observing, they schedule time to sit down and talk about that lesson that they saw. They have teachers reflect. They learn from teachers. And when they learn from teachers, then when they talk to a different teacher down the hall the next day, they share what they just saw this other teacher do. And they're really creating that whole professional learning community. They build a productive climate that is a great place that you want your child to attend. And it's also a great place where teachers want to work and they want to come to that building. Our skilled principals do that. They facilitate that school-wide professional learning community, and they organize the school into collaborative teams of like teachers that teach the same content, that may be the same grade level, where they're looking at student work together, they're learning from each other, and they're improving by discussing the best research-based practices and really learning and modeling with each other. And then, of course, that other behavior is they're constantly managing that personnel and resources. And when they are spending money, they're prioritizing teaching and learning at their school. And that's what the Wallace Foundation found when they did their research. And all that is funneled, if you see the middle of that graph, through an equity lens to ensure that every student in the school gets what she or he needs to have success. And that's what our highest skilled principals do. So, as a chief of school, Melissa Comine and I, what do we do to develop our principals to have those skills and to possess those behaviors? And so we are in schools every single week. We spend anywhere around 90 minutes to 2 hours at every site meeting with the principal, and we observe the principal facilitating meetings and leadership team, sitting in those collaborative PLC groups. We walk classrooms with principals. We talk about the instruction together. We model ways that they could work with teachers and they provide feedback, really develop their capacity that way. We also host and facilitate monthly professional development meetings where we are able to use the findings from Wallace and coach and provide research for our principals so they can learn more about that. And the three strands that we focus on every month is leadership development. We find very short articles on best practice on leaders, on how to be really skilled at developing trust in your school. That was one article that we had them read, and they read it, they discuss it, and they set action steps for themselves. And then we follow back up. So after that article you read last week, tell me about what you're doing in your school as a result of that. What are some things that you're doing to really develop trust with your new teachers in your school, for example? And we just help support them through that. Second thing we do, we call it a principal network, and we organize our principals into teams that have a similar goal, and we do our goals based on the Wallace behaviors. So like if they want to learn more about professional learning communities, they're in a group with other principals that have that same goal. And then we organize our time where they can learn with each other, do some research, and really push and learn from each other. Then a third key thing is that on-track data. We always have fresh data, school-wide and district-wide data that they look at, reflect on, and set some goals. And they talk with other principals about that. If they see a principal that their data is moving a little bit more than theirs, what are you doing at your school? And then we really want them to share those great strategies. So that third one we do is in that principal network, principals meet with each other outside of our PD, and they meet at least one other time or twice a month, and they will go to each other's buildings. Sometimes to save time, they'll get on a Google Meet and spend 45 minutes just talking about their practice. But really, it's about the work we do. It's about improving practice. And so they'll learn with and from each other. And then finally, the last piece is that professional development plan. In Iowa, every school leader creates a professional learning plan every year. And then it's all based on that Iowa Standards of School Leader, those 10 standards that Mrs. Comine shared with you. And then once we develop that with principals early in the year, and then we use that to align our coaching around their goal. And so the activities that we do at the site or at the campus are aligned with what their goal is, so we're constantly thinking about their goal and helping them to be better at their practice. So I want to close with this one final quote from the Wallace Foundation. And actually a quick fun fact, the Wallace Foundation funded this National Innovative SAM project when it first started the first couple of years. So things come back around. The Wallace are on the cutting edge of things. So I just want to read this. It is difficult to envision an investment with a higher ceiling on its potential return than a successful effort to improve principal leadership. And we know if we have highly effective principals at all schools, then we know our teachers are going to be supported and developed so they can do, which, as Mrs. Comine said, they are the most important. And if our principals can help support them, they're going to do their best work, and our students are going to learn at high levels every day. So what questions do you have for us? Come on back up.
Questions from the board?
I have a question. So what has our experience been with trying to elevate principals, seeing those statistics, that bottom 25, the top 75? What has our experience been in doing that? Like, how difficult is that? How much time has to be set aside to make that happen? I'm just curious. Not saying it's not worthwhile.
Thank you, Troy, for the question. I think I want to try to put it in words that are kind of comparable to some terms that you may have heard when we talk about supporting students. And so we have what we call the MTSS, multi-tier system of support, where we talk about universal targeted intensive support. And so there are things that every one of our principals receive because they rightfully deserve to learn and be developed. And then there are some additional targeted things that we can do with individual principals. And there's different ways that can happen. That can happen just by an increase of time. Maybe it's a type of support. Maybe it's more conversations. Maybe it's some cognitive coaching. Maybe you sit down and collaborate with them a little bit more. Maybe you act a little bit more as a consultant. And then sometimes, depending on the situation, because there are some really tough, complex situations that occur in schools, you can provide a little bit more direction. And then after they complete that work, you can go back and have a conversation and talk about why step 1, step 2, and step 3, and how we accomplish those different pieces. And so really it depends on the need of the principal, and then also how you respond, and then sometimes time and frequency is the factor as well.
Yeah. I'd also like to piggyback on that just a little bit. Let's just take elementary this year, Mr. Arthur. 5 of the elementary were either new or new to Council Bluffs. And so when Mark and I looked at his schedule, because what Mark and Melissa do is provide me a schedule of their week and which schools that they're in, and in case I ever need to get a hold of them or want to visit a school with them, I have that schedule. And Mark began to really talk about differentiating that schedule and providing, instead of everyone getting 90 to 2 hours, really looking at how can I still touch with everyone, but those that were new and beginning, I spent more time with them. And I think when you start to notice that you have your principals in different levels, you adjust that coaching to meet those levels. And as Mark began to do that, and then Mark and Melissa, we have a lot of new and beginning APs. They begin to structure around how can they bring them in and just spend time with them. And so I think then, once we begin to do that, where we have intentional purpose around meeting with them, I know that you're looking for an underperforming to a high-performing principal is where your question's kind of going. There becomes an assessment there. And then we begin to kind of look at what are the particular skills that we need to build upon. And that happens in those coaching sessions as they move through. And then also pulling on additional cabinet members to come out and support, whether it be around busing and buses rolling at the end of the day and how that looks for Mr. Hamilton to show up to. I need some support in classrooms and really providing that feedback to teachers and then Dr. Matthews or Mr. Milborn would also support. So there's a lot of ways we differentiate that and do everything we can to coach those principals up to that highly effective.
Okay, thank you.
So in other words, it would be very similar to what we do with you in our, the 10 standards that we assess your performance are basically the same as what, and that's intentional. So as a new superintendent to the district, we would review all 10 of the standards and expect some discussion around all of those standards, whereas since you've been with us for 5 years, going on now 6 years, we don't look at all 10. We've set out saying, okay, we're going to look at these few standards to see how we can help improve your performance. No different than what the first year principals are looking at. You're going to be looking at all 10 of the standards and that gets into that differentiation then.
Yes.
So that the first year principals are going to get all 10 standards touched on, and then the more senior principals are going to have those targeted, like, again, targeted 2 or 3 standards that they're going to be assessed on for that year.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Perfect.
Any other questions? So sorry, I had a question. The research that's sort of driving this model is new, but we've been doing basically this whole principal as instructional leader for some time. Did that sort of begin when we implemented the SAMs, or has that evolved over time?
So I can tell you, because prior, I don't know how Dr. Bruckner structured, but I do believe SAMs were brought in to get a more intentional focus on instruction.
Yeah.
And when I arrived, principals were very focused on instruction. So I found that in place. I can tell you, by using the Wallace Foundation, and now my focus has been more around the coaching and using the chief of schools to really provide that support with our principals and AP. It's still the focus of instruction, but now there's a layer of professional development that it's not just implementing a curriculum and the resource, but it's now around the conversations in the classrooms. How do we grow teachers? What are you doing to be part of that instructional improvement? And ensuring remember, we focus so much about feedback, high-quality feedback, because we knew what Hattie's research said around that. And where our teachers in our Panorama survey gave us feedback on what teachers were thinking about, our feedback our principals were leaving or having conversations. And I watched Ms. Kay. She was leaving little Post-it notes as we were visiting. She was giving instant feedback to teachers. And so I think what we've done is we've leveled that up to now we're looking at how do our chiefs of schools, David gave me a tap. How do our chiefs of schools really continue to help our principals grow to be better instructional leaders and not just focused on delivering of just instruction and knowing resource? But really, what are the best practices? What is research saying? And where do we get the best return on our investment?
One of the things that I don't know if I need to clarify or not, but the SAM is not coaching the principals in the same manner that Mr. Schultz and I are.
Right.
They're
Right.
protecting their time
Yeah.
to allow them to be the instructional leaders they need to be, and also being a first responder and doing some business tasks so they can do the most high leverage work to support our teachers and our students.
Yeah,
They
it's a
don't focus
yeah.
on the 10 standards like Mr. Schultz and I do.
It's a shift away from what we probably remember principals doing in schools, and which was a lot different.
Yeah.
And now principals can really focus on leadership of the most important thing in that's happening in our schools.
And I didn't mean to say that SAMs were that wasn't my intention. My intention was not to take away the important work that you're doing. It was that the SAMs were reminding them of the things that you are instructing them on, spending more time. So I'm sorry if you took offense that
Oh,
that
no,
I might
I
have
did
been
not.
implying that the Sam was doing all of the coaching. That was not by any means my intention. My intention was to make sure, to point out that the SAM was, based on that chart, making sure that the principal was focusing on those things that are important for the classroom. So I
No, you're
apologize
fine.
if I
You're fine.
offended
No, you're fine. Thank
in
you.
any way. That
I
was
just
not
wanted
my-
to make sure we clarified
Right.
it. We didn't
Yeah.
communicate very well. You're fine. Thank you, though. That's very kind.
Well, Dr. Miller just reminded me, and this is a good time to mention it, that it is National Principals Month. So a great time for all of us to express our gratitude and thank all of our principals for their hard work and in supporting our teachers and students and their families. So thank you to all of our principals. And thank you.
And that concludes our presentation.
Okay.
Presentation.
And that concludes all of our presentations for this evening in our business. Prior to the board meeting, we had a very brief work session to discuss our plans for the annual meeting coming up in November, and we also entered into a short exempt session to discuss strategy over collective bargaining, which is allowed under Iowa code, and we're going to return to exempt session in the conference room. So thank you all, and we are adjourned.